Hello everyone, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor painting, but the scene is going to be of a fallen, dead tree. Now, I don't have a photo to reference, but today I was out actually taking some photos, some film photography, and there was one that I was looking at. So right now that film is hanging and drying, and I think I'll digitize it and eventually use it as a reference point. But I kind of wanted to just play around with the idea and texture. And there's a few things that as I sat here and got ready to turn the camera on that I had thought about that's going to be important. So with the scene that I am imagining, that I'm thinking of, that took place, there was a dead fallen tree next to a live standing tree. And thinking about the two, I figured color-wise, I'll probably have to make that live tree bright and cheery, while the dead tree dark, to kind of emphasize the difference between the two. That's some way, tonality wise, I would need to do that. Since the one was laying down, the other one's standing up, it's going to be an L-shaped composition. And I was thinking, do I play with the location of where they intersect and bring one closer and then bring the other one up, just to make it a little bit more dynamic, make it a little bit more triangular? And what on earth do I do with the background for the background stuff? And in the case of this, where I was taking a photo, it was alongside the railroad tracks. Within the town that I live in, there is a rice mill. And I think that at this point, I think the rice mill is shut down. And there's railroad tracks that would lead to that. And then there were some that was go over the river. I think those are gone, the ones that went over the river to the town over to Kaplan, to their derelict rice mill. Anywho, stepping over the tracks and stepping onto the tracks, there was the railroad ties, I think that's what they're called, the wood, and it was just crumbling underneath my feet, so I don't think it gets really any use at all. So there was that kind of in front of the dead tree, and behind it was a Masonic cemetery, something that is supported by the town at this point, by the city of Abbeville, where I live. And there's the old cemetery right behind it. And then on the other side of the road, there was kind of an old Ace Hardware, which is still in use. I think a company named Brasso's owns it now. Just kind of giving you the town history. And alongside that is a cement slab, where I think there was a drive-up movie theater. I'll have to ask my parents. Anyway, so background-wise, in the picture there was the cemetery, but with fast and loose watercolors, I'm just thinking, how would I do that? So I'm thinking that I'm going to omit the cemetery. I think that I'll do some sort of sunset type sky. Yesterday I was playing around with my earth tones, and I'm going to use my earth tones with this one. I'll list what pigments I use as I use them. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to use yet. That being said, I apologize for the long-winded introduction. So I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. It is 11 by 14, 11 by 15, 100% cotton, 140 pound. And this is yellow ochre, which I'm going to use wet and wet. And while I put it in, I'll use it to help me create the composition, the shape of where I want things to sit. So I'll kind of take that tonalist, fast and loose approach and see where it takes me. Bright sky here. Our one tree trunk will come up in this region. We'll have the dead tree trunk, and it'll fall forward here. Let's grab some burnt umber. Start feeding that in the sky. I want to try to get a smooth transition between my colors. I'm just using the blue shop rag. Great paper towel for oil painting and watercolor. So the light will come here. My tree will come up, but I'll have a darker mass back here to block the eyes. So let's go light red oxide with ultramarine blue. We might just do earth tones and ultramarine blue in this painting. Actually, when I think about it, that's pretty much what my expanded palette is, unless I have a lemon yellow on it. Alright, so that's light red, ultramarine blue. That's to create that background there. We'll wind up having a foreground tree that'll come up big. This is the background in the distance. A little something to bring the eye in on an angle. Let me pause the camera. I think somebody's walking in. All right, so we'll have the shadow of the tree and the trunk. The fallen tree will come down here. I think we'll use Payne's Gray. So Payne's Gray is just usually a black with a blue into it. The different brands have different variations on it. A little bit closer, background, trees. Payne's Gray for the shadows. Lifting up to preserve where I want the dead tree that's fallen and the trunk for it, and then our living tree that's going to come up. I think we'll give the living tree foliage. I'm just using the pigment that I have on the brush. Probably pull out some white. So I splattered some pigment there. And just wipe it right off. Okay, so this is living tree foliage. This will be the shadow side of living tree. And let's see if we can get dark background object for that to push against. So the type of textures we can achieve. Paper towel in to lift different spots. If we want, we can grab a little bit of pigment with the #1 rigger and just very quickly put in some ideas in this background. It doesn't matter. If we go nice and organized with it, we can kind of just throw that in all over. We'll do a dry off in a moment. We might get some credit card scraping in first. This is going to be a large dark spot for the tree trunk that's broken. And I'll save this spot for whenever we go with the dry off. We'll scrape. This is the sharp edge of the cut up credit card. Just going willy-nilly, just getting a lot of movement for the idea of grass and overgrowth. Feel free to slow down that spot and play around a little bit more. But I'm just thinking I had spent so much time talking in the beginning of the video. I'm not quite sure how much time we're in. I'll check in a moment when we dry. All right, so we're gonna dry. We're gonna get a shift that takes place, so be aware of that. I'm gonna pause the camera while we do the dry off. All right, so we had quite a drying off taking place. It lightened up quite a bit. And you can see we pretty easily preserved some highlights and whites of the paper by just using the paper towel and just playing around a little bit before we started painting, just kind of planning things out. So here's a mixture of Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber. This is the shadow side of this tree. I'm using the #1 rigger. Sorry, this is the #4 rigger. Holds more pigment. And I just prefer it for trees. You can get more of a calligraphy type stroke to it. So this is our living tree that's coming up, obviously. Well, you could have trees that have fallen over or that have died standing up. But our portion that comes over and falls, the dead and broken bit, bring along here. And it would cast a shadow that would catch grass and have a different texture. So I'm just using the side of the brush here. This is a technique that I saw in a lot of David Usher's videos. David Usher is a prolific painter and has plenty of YouTube tutorials. Let's grab some more burnt umber into this Payne's Gray mix. Got some dark notches. add some darks. And I'm just thinking about the chaotic nature of a fallen tree and how kind of disruptive and uprooted it is. There's one on the road to the post office that must have fallen over recently. We had some hurricanes in the past year that knocked big trees over, and just the whole, I guess you would call it the root ball of the tree, is just so huge. The diameter just taller than a person, and it just tears a hole in the ground. And then from that you have your branches and your trunk and everything just coming out of that all willy-nilly, just all over the place. What I am concerned with here is that it's looking like a shadow extension of the tree itself. So I'm going to start creating a lot of just branches and protrusions coming out of it. I wonder if we can even lighten that up and change the color for this guy. This is some raw sienna. Let's lift up the lights on that edge. Even bring some growth coming up from this. Feed in a little bit of darks. Let's create the foliage for this live tree. I'm just using whatever was on the hake prior to the dry off. We can use the hake for that chaos as well. That would be over here. It's a lot of movement. In fact, I am by no means a good photographer. In fact, I think I'm pretty terrible at photography. And I've been doing the black and white photography, the film photography, and playing with the contact prints. And I'm working on just setting up a temporary, and this is going to go somewhere, a temporary dark room, so that I can kind of do regular prints, because I've been doing alternative processes, the cyanotype and the Van Dykes, and I would like to play around with the printmaking, the prints that I had done in college and in high school when I took those classes. So I developed the film today, and I mentioned at the beginning that it's hanging and drying currently. And I looked at the film real quick, and I saw a lot of lines and a lot of marks and the texture. And I just thought to myself, oh my God, this would be so good. Now, I don't know if it's going to be good or not, but when I looked at that, I just saw a lot of movement and a lot of in focus detail. And I think that is what I've been going towards with painting and photography, the movement and the texture. And I don't know, I feel like that film, hopefully, I might have achieved it with one of the photos. I'm playing back and forth with the number 1 and the number 4 rigger, just creating these marks. Here is where I need a lot more motion. Now I'm inadvertently creating another type of composition. At first, when I talked about the tree and the dead tree, it'd be an L shape. Then I kind of created a little bit more of an angle. I kind of put a little bit of triangle action in there. And putting the bigger foliage here is creating what I believe is called a steam yard, a iron yard composition. Essentially what it is this concept. Near the middle, you have a large object, a very heavy object. Far away from it, you have a smaller object. The bigger object in the middle is balanced out by a farther object. So if we had a big object right on this side of the middle, then we'd have a small object out here. So, steel yard composition. By having our small branches, everything come out. I am very fond of having an area of interest this close in a still life and then leading back into the objects that's vertical. In fact, if I'm able to get something to hang off the edge of a table, even better right there. And that's either Hammy or Harrison doing that. And after this, I'll go sit on the couch so he can sit on my lap and not do all the cat crying. It's about 6 in the evening my time, so I just fed them before I went here. I think they just want lovies. They are awesome cats. Except when they make bad noise, golly. So, grab more raw sienna. I think we would benefit from more foliage. We can do a dry off and try to get more texture. I haven't used any burnt umber, raw umber. Raw umber might be the dark that we need to get that going. So let me pause, we'll do a dry off and we'll add that. All right, so we did a dry off. You can grab some raw umber. Now here is going to be the bronzing effect. I didn't wet the wet brush. I haven't really wet the hake since we started this painting. Excuse me. So it's going on quite thick at this point, and that's going to have a reflective property whenever it dries, just because of the quantity that I'm putting on, which has its pros and cons. I mentioned it in the previous video, grabbing some water now, and somebody had commented that they have issues with that and they didn't know the name for it. So that was very cool that 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 somebody had gotten to that point and saw that. The term, I heard it from Joe Menza, who heard it from handprint.com. Handprint.com is a rabbit hole of pigment and watercolor information, and has just so much information on it. I honestly would not recommend it. The reason being is it's just so informative and it's so good that you could spend all days looking at it and looking it up and comparing stuff and not painting from it. I think that there becomes a point where that information is superbly valuable to you, and I think there's good beginner information on that website. So maybe you don't find stuff on it, but finding the degree shift that different pigments have is way above our information level at this painting stage. I personally don't think I'll ever be that good to be able to utilize that information there. But a lot of terminology that I do use comes from that, you know, when I talk about the drying shift and those concepts. So I know I'm kind of wishy-washy with saying with that website, but I'm just giving you fair warning. And Joe Menza had mentioned a solution for the bronzing, which was, I think, a light spritzing with water and a dabbing with a paper towel. So experience the effect when you put copious amounts of pigment down. See if you like it. See if it's useful for you or not. That being said, just accentuating a few spots. We're going to do a dry off and sign. And of course, you are always welcome to follow along with any one of these tutorials, any one of these experiments that I do. In fact, you know, sign your name to it. I encourage you. You have my express permission to sell anything you do that you have done whenever you follow anything from one of my videos. I want you all to be successful and have cash money for art supplies. That being said, if you ever want to support this channel, I have tons of ways down below, either through Patreon, through ordering something on Etsy, or simply donating, simply commenting, simply liking and sharing. That helps out too. I wonder if this will be the last painting of 2021. It's the 30th, I think. Tomorrow's New Year's Eve. Let me pause and dry off. Well, that was definitely a fun one. I hope you enjoyed. And, oh, also, anything that you paint, if you'd like to send me a picture of it, tag me in Instagram or Facebook, feel free, let me know. I want to see what y'all do. Here's to the end of 2021 and the start of 2022. You all have a safe and happy New Year's. Bye.